Chapter 6. The Sky is Falling. The roaring noise stopped. The sound of the nervous breathing filled the silence. Jesse looked ahead into the tunnel, then behind them into the root cellar. The sun shone down the dark hole, leaving a warm, buttery patch at the foot of the stairs, like a welcome mat. He signaled to the others to turn around and follow him back to the root cellar. The three of them crawled into the patch, into sunlight. Overhead they heard the loud grinding of gears and brakes, and then the earth mover's heavy door opened and shut with a clunk. They waited in tense silence for a few minutes. Jesse put his mouth to Daisy's ear and whispered, "Maybe he just parked it and went away." She put her mouth to his ear and said, "Maybe he's waiting for us to come out so he can pounce on us and capture Emmy and drink Emmy's blood." Daisy didn't want to say the last part out loud, not in front of Emmy. But Jesse knew where she was going. He set his jaw. He very carefully and quietly climbed the stairs and balanced himself on the door frame, straightening up just enough to see out over the edge of the hole. He didn't see anything. He didn't hear anything, so he straightened up a little more. The enormous orange earth mover stood right next to the barn, facing the deep woods, in front of the bumper, mere feet from the hole. Jesse craned his neck. The cab seemed to be empty. He leaned down and signaled for Daisy and Emmy to join him. "Look," he whispered to the others. "He's not in the cab. I don't know where he is, but if we crawl under the earth mover, we can sneak back to the rear and then cut over and run for home. Plan?" Daisy nodded and whispered, "Take off her leash." Jesse unhitched the leash from Emmy's collar. Daisy turned around so Jesse could unzip the backpack. He switched off the flashlight and handed it to him. When Jesse had finished tucking everything away and zipping the backpack, and turned to Emmy and said, "Listen to me. This is important." Dog form, Emmy, panting, gave her the complete attention. "Follow us. As soon as we get to the back of the big orange machine, you run for it. But you don't run till I tell you to. I'll hold up one finger, then two fingers. On the third finger, I want you to run as fast as you can for the laurel bushes. Don't stop for anything. Don't look back. Wait there. I think you can. I think you can." He smiled encouragingly at Emmy, who let out two barely audible yips. "Good girl," he whispered. Both cousins hugged the dog and pressed their faces into her fur, which smelled of damp dirt and a hint of chili pepper. "We'll be right behind you," said Jesse. He eased himself up out of the hole. He crawled over the front bumper of the monstrous machine and waited for as the two others slithered up after him. Together, they slipped under the machine. Jesse and Daisy ducked to avoid bumping their heads on a network of brand new shiny ducts and pipes that ran down the center of the earth mover's giant underbelly. In a crouch, they ran past an enormous black treaded wheel. There were so many wheels that Jesse lost count of them by the time they reached the rear bumper and cleared it. They stopped. Hand on knees, the cousins struggled to catch their breath. They were winded, as much from nerves as exertion. Emmy stood between them, haunches panting. Her eyes were on Jesse as he waited for the signal to run. Jesse crept over to the side of the earth mover and peered over along the length of the wheel. The coast looked clear. Jesse held up one finger. Emmy's ears picked up. Jesse held two fingers in front of him. Emmy stood and got ready. But as Jesse was about to raise a third finger, the earth mover's engine fired up. blasting with boiling hot diesel fumes. "Run for it!" Jessie screamed. Emmy exploded across the pasture and up the hill. Jessie and Daisy took off after her. But Jessie's shoelace got tangled in something. He sprawled face first into a fat thistle plant. Jessie turned over, face stinging with nettles in his head reeling. For a minute, he didn't even know where he was. Daisy tugged at his arm and pointed frantically at something. And then his senses returned to him and saw the earth mover about to back over him. Its backing up beep signal continued ominously. Jessie rolled aside just in time to avoid being crushed beneath the giant wheels. The earth mover continued to move in reverse until its massive body completely blocked their escape route. "This way!" Daisy screamed. She took off toward the deep woods, the backpack slamming against her shoulder blades as she ran. Jessie scrambled to his feet and headed after her across the pasture, moving quickly, but fast enough for them to feel the massive metal scooper on the front bumper ripping at their heels. If one of them were to trip and fall, St. George would either scoop them up or run them over. As Jessie gaped at the dark wall of trees looming up before him, he had a sudden vision of St. George rolling into the deep woods, the earth mover leveling acres of trees as it churned after them. Jessie caught up with Daisy and pulled her off to the side. He dragged her, scrambling and staggering, around the back end of the earth mover, where he shouted over the motor's thunder, "The door in the earth!" Gasping for her breath, with sweat streaming down her face, Daisy nodded. They took advantage of the time St. George needed to turn the earth mover around and rush back towards the barn. First Jessie, then Daisy leapt into the hole, bumped down the steps, and landed on their behinds at the foot of the root cellar. "Safe!" screamed Daisy. A great dark shadow loomed overhead, blocking out the sky. Jessie lunged for the backpack and unzipped it. He tossed a flashlight to Daisy and pulled out the ball of string. Quickly, he tied one end of the string of the canning to a canning shelves just as the dirt became pouring down on their head. He looked around frantically for Daisy, but she was already waiting for him at the entrance to the mine tunnel, beaming her flashlight like a beacon. He reached her and spun around. They both watched as a cascade of rocks and earth poured into the root cellar, flowing toward the tunnel. Emmy's voice, like a golden bell, rang in Jessie's head. "The sky is falling! Run, Chicken Little, run!" Daisy shouted over the noise of the churning earth mover, "Where's Emmy?" Jessie shouted, "The laurel bushes!" There was an alarming series of muffled explosions. Then silence. Dirt now covered the mine shaft entrance completely. Daisy's face looked ghostly and grim in the flashlight's beam. "Well, that's that, I guess. Maybe Emmy will come back with the magic shovel and dig us out," Jessie said. Then shouldn't we stick around?" Daisy asked. "I'm worried that the mine shaft might collapse." "I think we need to get away from this spot for now," Jessie said. "Besides, if my hunch is right, this tunnel winds up beneath the deep woods clearing." Daisy didn't want to say if Jessie's hunch was right. Then St. George had them trapped either way. So she shut her mouth and turned to lead the way into the tunnel. Jessie followed, unraveling the string from the ball as he went. Daisy was a little surprised she wasn't more terrified. Maybe she was too thankful to be afraid. Thankful that St. George hadn't squished them flat with the earth mover, and that Emmy had made it safely to the laurel bushes, that Jessie was with her and she wasn't alone. As she walked, she shone the flashlight all around, even though there really wasn't much to see. The tunnel was framed with wood that looked very old and alarmingly rotten in places. Long, hairy tree roots reached down through the ceiling. Daisy and Jessie had to duck to avoid getting tangled in them. "We're under the deep woods now," Jessie said with certainty. "At least we're going in the right direction," Daisy said brightly. "Yep," said Jessie. Every so often the other tunnels branched out to either side, but the cousins stuck to what they felt like was the main tunnel. Without a compass, there was no telling if they were going in the right direction or not. Daisy was the first to break a long silence. "Sure is dark down here." "Sure is," replied Jessie. "I don't know about you, but I think I've ever been in darkness quite like this. Deep." "It's pretty deep, all right." Then they lapsed back into silence. Daisy did not want to say out loud her other thoughts that were streaming through her brain. What if St. George captured Emmy? What if this mine didn't connect to somewhere St. George was working in? The area was honeycombed with old mines, but they didn't necessarily all link up in one big network. What if one way out of this place was completely sealed? They plodded along, their mouths dry, but neither wanting to stop to drink. Not with the darkness swarming just beyond the flashlight's feeble beam, like something alive. After a while, Daisy let out a yelp. There was a small thud, 2 bright flashes, then a darkness that was so complete it was as if they both had suddenly gone blind. "Daisy!" Jessie crept forward. "Where are you? What happened? You okay?" "I'm okay," she said after a beat. Her voice came further away than expected. "My hair got snagged in one of those tree roots, and oh." Jessie needed both hands. "I needed both hands to get my hair loose, and I dropped the flashlight." "Where?" Jessie asked. "Over there, I think," she said. "Keep talking so I can find you," Jessie said. Daisy prattled. "I hate my hair. My bandana must have fallen off when we were running. If I ever get out of here, I'm going to shave it all off and..." "Got you," Jessie said, fastening his arm around her wrist. She clutched at him. "Jessie, we have to stick together." "Of course we do," he said. He could tell she was so scared that there was no room for him to be. "Hold on to my belt loops on my back," he told her. "We'll work our way down a ways. The flashlight has to be close by. I'm going to get on my hands and knees. So you have to come with me, okay, Daisy?" "Whatever you said," she said shakily. He got down and groped around in the dirt, towing Daisy behind him. Daisy tapped him on the right arm and said, "Try over there." Then, with a jolt, Jessie realized that they had something just as important as a flashlight. The ball of string. He must have let go when they heard Daisy cry out. "We lost the string too, didn't we?" Daisy said, in a little voice. When Jessie didn't answer, she wailed, "I knew it. It's all my fault." "No, it's not," he said. He lay back in the soft dirt, and Daisy went with him. She was sobbing. He wanted to open his mouth and bawl like a baby right now, right along with her, but he told himself that would only make both of them feel worse. "We should have stayed and waited," he thought. Why had he led them into the old mine? It was the stupidest idea he'd ever had. Why had Daisy followed along? She knew better. No one would ever be able to find them. They were as good as buried alive. And if all that weren't bad enough, Jessie had to pee. This is a magical adventure. Then I want my old life back. I'm so sorry, Daisy said, letting out a huge shuddering yawn. She mumbled, I should have put you in charge of the flashlight. Now it's all my fault we're lost, and I hate my hair. It's not your fault or your hair's fault. Okay, Daisy? Okay, she said after a short silence. She asked, Are you hungry? I'm starved. I could eat a giant pizza burger with double fries right now. Jessie smiled in the darkness. How about an energy bar instead? I'll take it, she said. Hand me the backpack. Here. Jessie fumbled for the zipper, unzipped it, and reached around inside. His fingers gazed at the jar of worms. For one wild moment, he thought they might be saved. Then he remembered Miss Elodie's directions to use them only in the presence of the book. The next thing he felt and smelled was Emmy's head of cabbage. He was just about to toss it when he thought, we might end up eating it if we get desperate. Jessie shuddered. His fingers lit gratefully upon an energy bar. Here, he said, holding it out. Daisy snatched it. Thanks, she said. He heard the crackle of the paper as she tore it open. Then he heard her take a bite and chew. He crawled off a little ways and relieved himself. Following the sound of her chewing, he returned to the backpack and found another energy bar, tore it open, and ate it greedily. After that, they both fell asleep with their heads on the backpack, even though the cabbage and jar of worms made far from an ideal pillow. A light woke up Jessie, flickering on the inside of his eyelids. Pink as the first blush of dawn, he opened his eyes and blinked while beside him. Daisy also began to stir. A band of hobgoblins with their torches stood around them in a circle, staring at them with eyes that were without pupils or irises, red-rimmed and milky white. Daisy squeezed Jessie's wrist. A noise rose up from the hobgoblins, a dark, moist grunting, snuffling through their snouts. It was a very underground sound. Jessie counted 7, 3 bamboo torches, the kind you buy in a garden store, tiki torches. The other 4 had sharp pickaxes hoisted over their shoulders and cuffs in their orange jumpsuits dragged in the dirt. One of them had rolled up their cuffs to their pants, and Daisy nearly cried out when she saw his feet. His feet were bare and had no toes. Where his shoes were supposed to be was just a gray wedge. Let's see who we've got here, said Jessie. Sleepy, dopey, dumpy, grubby. Jess, this isn't funny, Daisy whispered. It's, she fumbled for the right word. Hideous. But Jessie couldn't help himself. Now he understood why heroes in action movies made dumb jokes when they were in trouble. They did it to keep themselves from screaming their heads off. What do you want? Jessie asked the hobgoblin in what he hoped was a stern and steady man voice. He got more snuffling in reply. Daisy said, Jess, they might not use words like we do. One of them sidled over his bandy legs and pulled Jessie to his feet. Daisy, hanging onto Jessie's belt loop, came up with him. The hobgoblins crowded closer and stared. One of them thrust out their mitten-like hand to Daisy. He was holding her purple bandana. think he wants you to take it," said Jessie. Daisy shot out a trembling hand and snatched the bandana. "Thanks," she said, forcing a polite smile and hastily tying the bandana around her head. Another offered Jessie the lost flashlight, and still another of the odd creatures held out the ball of string. "Thanks, guys," Jessie said as he took the flashlight from one hobgoblin and the ball of string from another. He moved in slow motion as he bent down and unzipped the backpack, put the stuff away, and zipped the backpack up, straightened and slipped it on the straps of his shoulders. The hobgoblin's eyes followed every move with fascination. "Do you think we look as weird and scary to them as they do to us?" Jessie wondered aloud. "If you ask me, they look even scarier up close," Daisy said warily. "I don't know," Jessie said thoughtfully. "I was just thinking they seem a little less scary now. See how they're looking at us? They don't look mean at all. In fact," Daisy cried out, "look, they're crying. Oh my gosh, Jess, the hobgoblins are crying." Their tears were actually muddy, Jessie said, although pretty much everything about the hobgoblins was muddy. There was something about those muddy brown tears that not only moved Jessie's heart, but also his brain. "I think I know what they are," he said quietly. "I mean, besides hobgoblins and Thodic ones and St. George's minions. Daisy, these are the children of the earth that Professor was talking about. We're looking right at them, St. George's first victims." Daisy, who had begun to think the exact same thing, said, "They are." The hobgoblins prodded them gently with their mitts, and they began to move forward as a group. "And you know what else?" Daisy said, as they marched along the tunnel with their hobgoblin escorts. "I think they brought the torches for us." Jessie nodded. "Probably they see fire in the dark," he said, "or sense things, like bats." At the mention of bats, Daisy reached up and patted the bandana on her head. "That would make sense," she said. "Do you think they're taking us to St. George?" "Probably," said Jessie, "but it's not their fault. What choice do they have? St. George has made them slaves, right?" "Poor things. They probably don't like St. George any more than we do," she said. Somehow it made Daisy feel better to be taken captive by beings who were themselves captives. Well, at least they didn't catch Emmy in this trap. She's safe in the bushes. "Right," said Jessie, but he wished he knew that for sure. They soon arrived at the spot where several tunnels came together to form a star. A massive tree root grew right in the center of it. The hobgoblins halted before the root. For an uneasy moment, Daisy was afraid the root might be blocking the way. But the hobgoblins arranged themselves around the tree and sat cross-legged, like kids at circle time. They looked up at Jessie and Daisy and made that noise, the grunting, earthy sound again. "What do you guys want?" Jessie asked them. "Maybe they want us to admire the humongous tree root," said Daisy. "But I've kind of had enough of tree roots for the time being, thank you very much." Still, even Daisy had to admit it was an impressive sight, this hairy, dense, tangled network of roots that hung down in a ball almost at the floor. They were startled when at the very next moment they heard a deep voice coming from inside the tree root. "You may approach, Her Eminence." And that's the end of Chapter 6. Chapter 7 is called Her Royal Lowness.